So today we're going to talk about how we are going to start a brand new campaign. And that means coming up with an initial session. There's nothing wrong with creating a typical session where you meet in a tavern, get together, slay some monsters. But I'm sure we can all do better than that. We can create a session that can get our characters feeling part of the world, our players invested in the outcomes, and make the stakes matter. So I'm going to present to you a few of my own ideas where I really think we can get that first session to sing and make the characters and our players really feel immersed in it and excited for our next session. And to do that, I think we need to turn to literature, writing and storytelling, because there's lots of brilliant advice out there for budding authors of how to write a book. But I think we can use an awful lot of that in our own work as GMs. And it only takes a little bit to make them feel part of our world. The first thing that we need to do is make our world feel immersive so our players themselves can feel immersed within it. And to do that, we can use a literary trick as described by the great Brandon Sanderson. But he has written such books as Mistborn and the Stormlight Archives. But he also, it turns out, he lectures at university. He teaches a course on writing novels. And one of the most interesting concepts he brings across is this idea of a hollow world. So when you're doing your world building, you may be tempted to write down every single detail of every single thing and every single place in your world. And it turns out that's probably a good way to burn out. And you also may find that you generate contradictions within your world that start butting up against each other. So the best way to avoid this is to get your players to fill the gaps in their heads by themselves. So we need to make sure that whatever we are feeding our players during the game reinforces our world and reinforces the themes in our world. In our hollow world theory, we want to choose an important number of characteristics or features or places within our world and hammer them home to our players who can then fill in the gaps in between them. I'll give you an example. In the campaign I've just started, so WebRail, this is based on a setting where you have islands floating in an endless abyss, like a starless abyss, and they're all joined together by great big spider webs. So the spiders are good guys. And trains run across these spider webs and create commerce and life and everything, but these are big trains, like city-sized trains. So what that means is that in the first session, I'm really hammering home the setting is actually there on the trains, and everything is about how the train functions and the society with it. Another way to get our players really immersed in the world is to make them feel part of it. And I think it's quite a simple trick to do that, is to give them all a bespoke background. So the way I usually do this is I'll create like a table, maybe like a D20 table of just different professions that you might find within your setting. Roll on that or choose one of those professions, and then that immediately gives them an idea of their character. All that we need to do is to give them an idea, they can run with it, and then as the game progresses, they can fill that background out mentally and that character become more rounded over time. So like, for example, in the setting I've just done, so we had two characters that were actually born on the trains and rolled train professions. So one was an engineer, one was a lookout on the train. And then during the game session, they were able to actually have extra little bits of knowledge about what's going on because they're directly interacting with what's happening. We really want to have our first session to hit with a bang. It's got to have teeth, I think. I think there's nothing wrong with a smaller beginning and then building up over time. But I think we could do something cooler, more exciting. So I think it's perfectly fine to have your first session with big stakes and to just really push the fireworks out to make something memorable for your players. But I also think we can use another literary device about storytelling, and that is to make sure that our beginning is as close to the action as possible. The typical start, traditional start for any old D&D game is you turn up in a tavern with fellow adventurers, and then you find something on the notice board or you're hired together, and then you go out and slay the monsters together. But I think we can do better than that. But there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but I think we can do something more exciting. And we can bind our party together in a more fundamental way that makes them feel really part of a team. So we start as close to the action as possible, and we find a way of binding our party together to make them feel part of a team from the word go. So how can we do that? We give them very little downtime at the beginning, maybe just enough time for them to introduce each other to each other, and then they're hit by an instigating effect. So it might be that our party are on a boat and they get stranded, or they may suddenly be imprisoned, or they may suffer a traumatic event together that binds them together. Our first adventure that we're going to run should probably be representative of our campaign overall. So that means if our campaign is focused on dungeon delving and finding treasure, then we should probably be doing that on our very first session. Likewise, if we have a campaign based around domain buildings and politics, then perhaps the first session should have them caught in a political conundrum or finding themselves in debt to a powerful individual, and they're going to have to find a way to wriggle out of this. Or if we've got an entire campaign that is heavily focused on combat, then you've got to follow through with that promise and give them plenty of combat in that first session. But I think this also is true for the themes of your games as well. And when I say themes, I don't mean like pretentious literary themes, although you tend to find as your game develops, it has its own themes of itself. But I'm thinking more like broad themes. So if I wanted to run a campaign about pirates, then that first session has to have something that has the tropes of a pirate story in there. Maybe they get stranded on a desert island, or maybe they get boarded by pirates themselves. So we've got to follow through with these campaign promises of theme and action and give it to them in their first session so our players have a fairly consistent idea of what they're in for in the road ahead. Now, that doesn't mean things aren't going to change over time, because things always change during a D&D campaign. But I think it's good to start off on a clear path and a clear understanding of where they're going. And talking about clarity, I think this is perhaps the most important thing for that first session. But I think from the word go, there needs to be absolute clarity on what the party needs to do. Perhaps a larger meta narrative of what they understand is happening in the world and what needs to be achieved. And I think also the stakes need to be high enough to make it exciting. And stakes can always affect them personally, or they can affect a region or a large group of people. And just because they're first level when they start up doesn't mean that they can't face down something scary, and it doesn't mean they can't achieve something great. I'm a moderate to okay artist. You have different types of maps for different types of people. And I think in D&D, what is more important than realistic drawings or beautiful realistic drawings is clear images and symbols that our party can represent. So I don't have to draw beautiful mountains. I just draw a sketch of a mountain and my party understands what that is. So the instigating effect in this first session is the train crash. They are being evacuated from a fragment, one of these floating islands in the abyss, and they're being taken towards like one of these mega trains, something like the size of a city. But they need to get there in 5 days, otherwise this thing is going to be moving away because it's just too dangerous to stay. So for the first few sessions, they've got a ticking clock to arrive at this evacuation point so they can be safe. But our instigating incident is train crash. Our engine is destroyed, people are thrown out, hundreds dead, and we've got this broken container leaking like radiation. It starts off with a fight with some demons aboard the train, just like a tutorial combat to get my party to understand how combat in our system works. And then I show them this. And they realize what trouble they are in because they have no way of propelling themselves. By doing this, because they're traveling together in the same cabin, we make sure that the party are grouped together. They're not just simply a bunch of individuals. Secondly, we've got our ticking clock. That's our stakes. And they have a very clear goal of what they need to achieve. They need to get both themselves and the survivors to this evacuation point. Okay, so let's show you the second map of the actual sort of like dungeon delving they did. So this is the second map that I gave to my players. As I said to the players, when they were traveling through this area where there was this big train crash, the last thing they saw before the crash was an ancient train station. And this whole area they're traveling through, this whole fragment, is full of undead. So the only reason they traveled through it was they had to have a shortcut. And then one of the party members realized, it's like, wait a minute, there was a station not far from here. There might still be some working equipment in there that we could use. The rest of the session, because I'm going to get them doing lots of dungeon delving in this, is going into this old train station, trying to get the train working and escaping. And there's a great big horde of zombies about here, and they have to work, they have to find their way past this horde of zombies, because obviously if you get into a fight with 100 zombies, they're going to lose. So they've got to find clever and cunning ways to do that. A lot of this was carefully planning and what they needed to do to get that train working. So they managed to get in, past the security systems, and then find this train that they got working. And everything worked out well in the end. So by doing this, I'm laying down the expectation that my party is going to have to do more of something similar. They're going to have to go into ancient buildings and try and find treasure, or they're going to have to extract things from there. Get our parties involved in the world, give them clear stakes, give them very clear goals, and our first session should be representative of the themes and the sort of actions that we expect them to do throughout the campaign, because it's kind of like a promise we're making to them. We're saying, this is what I'm going to do with you the first time, so the next session should be something similar. Okay, right, thank you very much, and take care.